What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. It's the Man Welding, and it has been far too long since I've jumped on here and made a video. So that's exactly what I'm gonna do. And I got a fun one for you guys today, but before I get started, I just want to acknowledge the fact that I have accumulated about 150 subscribers on YouTube. And I just want to give a shout out to you guys. I appreciate it. I'm glad that there are at least some people who find value in what I'm saying here online. You know, a lot of the stuff that I get on here and share, I do so because I genuinely think that, it can help somebody, or at the very least, it can be some form of entertainment. And just judging from the comments that you guys have left on my videos, I really want to say thank you, each and every one of you guys. So anyways, now that that's out of the way, I want to share a story with you guys about the time I got expelled from high school. That's right, I got expelled from high school, and it happened in my senior year, about probably like 2 weeks before I was set to graduate. I literally only had half a credit left before I was set to graduate, right? I was right there at the very, very end. So before I tell that story, I just want to tell a quick story about something that happened at school a few months before the time that I got expelled, where I was very, very close to getting expelled. And I think you'll find them both kind of funny, right? So anyways, a few months before I got expelled, this was senior year, I was going to high school in Jensen Beach. This is Jensen Beach High School. I'm sure some of you guys know about it. And anyways, back in those days, I was a big pothead, right? Not unlike a lot of high schoolers. So anyways, what we used to do is we would smoke weed at school. And this is before all the vape carts and hash and edibles and everything was very common and accessible for young people to get their hands on. So we're talking about smoking bud. And basically the way we would do it is we had a class called TV production. And in that class, the students would produce videos and edit them. And, there was like a local CCTV channel within the school where we would broadcast the news and that sort of stuff, right? So anyways, we would have a group of people and we would take cameras from the classroom and we would basically have free range to travel around the campus and to film different segments for the school's news or whatever. So we would take a couple guys, right? And someone would have weed on them and we would make a little makeshift smoking device out of a pen and some tinfoil or whatever, something that could be easily disposed of. And then we would, under the guise of filming a segment, we would walk out somewhere way out in the parking lot or way out in the soccer field or the football field or up in the bleachers. And we would act we were filming something. And then we would take turns kind of ducking down and hitting the bowl and getting high, and of course you hold that hit in and try not to let any smoke come out, and then you'd fucking douse yourself in Axe body spray and chew bubble gum and all this bullshit. And, for the most part, we always got away with it, right? I'm sure some teachers had their suspicions, but it was never a huge issue. But anyways, one morning, we're out filming for TV production. I had that class first period, and I wasn't necessarily smoking weed that day, but I had a bunch of weed in my car that was parked on school property. And that particular day, I was in the gymnasium and I was filming something, and all of a sudden the police come busting into the gym with the drug dog. They were doing a random sweep for drugs. And the first location they were hitting was the locker room, which makes sense, right? And I just remember seeing the cops come in with the drug dog, and they come through the gym and they go straight into the locker room. And I just remember looking to the person who was standing next to me and I was like, damn, I'm fucked. So I immediately go back to my classroom, which was TV production, and I'm freaking out because I know once they hit the locker rooms, they're going to make their way to the parking lot and the dog is going to smell my car and it's going to be a hit. So, and the teacher, Shout out to Mr. Hans Hines, the TV production teacher. He's super cool. And he helped me out on this one because when there is an active drug search going on at any high school, it is pretty standard that you're not supposed to let kids leave or write them hall passes or let them go to the nurse or anything like that. So I go up to the teacher and I'm obviously visually very distressed, right? And I'm like, Mr. Hines, oh, I'm so sick. Like, I really need to go to the nurse's office right now. And he looked at me and he's like, you're not trying to evade the drug dogs, are you? And I was like, no, I'm so sick. I really have to go right now. And he's like, all right. So he writes me a pass. So I'm like, damn, all right, cool. We're doing it. And I go to the nurse's office, and the nurse at Jensen Beach High School at this time, I don't want to be mean or, recall things incorrectly, but I tend to remember that she was not the most pleasant person. She wasn't super forgiving, and she didn't give a lot of leniency. So I thought I was going to hit a roadblock when I got to the nurse's office. But I get there, and there was a substitute nurse in, and she was pretty oblivious to what was going on. So I'm like, and I see my buddy Doug, he's in the nurse's office too. I think his first period, he was like an office administrator or something like that. So we kind of make that eye contact, and he knows that I got shit on me. And I come to find out later that he had some shit on him, right? So we're both like freaking out. And I talk to this substitute nurse, and I'm like, oh, I'm so sick. I gotta go. I gotta call my sister, whatever. So I call home, and at this point, I was a senior. My mom was at work, but my sister, who's older than me, was at home. So I call home, and she answers the phone, and I won't go into detail about my sister, right? But I'm like, Lindsay, I'm so sick. I have to come up. Tell this lady I can leave right now. I have to go. And she's like, well, I don't know, Steven. I need mom to, green light this whole thing. I'm like, Lindsay, I am so sick. I need to go right now. Like, tell this lady I can go. And by some miracle, she tells this lady, okay, Steven can come home. And the lady basically says, all right, you can leave. So I'm like, counting my lucky stars at this point. I'm like, holy shit, I can't believe it. I'm actually gonna get out of here unscathed. So I get my backpack and I walk out of the front of the school, and the cops are in that front parking lot, like doing their rounds around all the cars. And I'm parked over in the secondary parking lot by the tennis courts. And my fucking heart's pounding. I'm like, oh man, they're definitely gonna stop me. They're gonna want to see my car before I go. So I just stare straight ahead, don't ignore anything that's being said. I don't think they called out to me or anything, but I just sped walk to my fucking car. I drove this little piece of shit Corolla, and I see my car, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so close, I'm gonna make it. And I'm sticking my key in the door to unlock it, and I'm fumbling, dude, my hands are shaking, I'm so nervous. And I get in the car, and I crank the ignition, and I pull out of the parking lot, and I get off the school property onto Jensen Beach Boulevard, and I'm like, woo! I made it, yeah! And I was so stoked. I had this super good weed. It was the mango. And I went home, and I basically was just smoking that weed all day. Hey, I made it. Awesome. I celebrated, right? It was a big win. So I made it that time. But the next time, I wasn't so lucky. So let me tell you that story now. So a few months after that incident that I just went over, senior year, almost to graduation, right? So this happened on a Friday, and the night before, a Thursday night, me and my best friend at the time, this dude named Ramsey, we go to a party out in Palm City, right? So we were partying that night, we were out late, and we both stayed. I didn't go home and he didn't go home, right? I crashed at my buddy's house and he crashed over at some girl's house. And I was basically just going to skip school that next day because I was hungover, I was tired, and I didn't really care too much about school at that point. But anyways, that morning, because I usually gave Ramsey a ride to school, he's calling me, blowing up my phone. He's like, I need you to give me a ride. We got to go to school today. I'm on academic probation. If I don't go to school, I'm going to get expelled. Blah, 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 blah. I'll smoke all my weed with you, blah, 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 blah. And he was my boy. So I was like, all right, I'll help you out. So I left my buddy's house. I drove over and picked him up from where he was staying. And, we're smoking on the way to school. And of course, we get there. I park in that same parking spot where I had narrowly escaped from the last story, over by the tennis courts. And so we go into class, or we go into the office to get our late pass because the first class had already started for that day. And the lady who was at the office at the counter, Ramsey was looking a hot mess, like we looked like we had been up all night, not been home. And, that's not really acceptable when you're a student and you're at a school that has like a zero tolerance policy. And I remember she said to him, she's like, Ramsey, did you go home last night? And he's like, yeah. And the lady's like, okay, obviously, like something's up. So she took me and she took Ramsey and she put us in separate offices, right? She put him in the principal's office and put me in the assistant principal's office. And they left me in there with no one for like a good 45 minutes, right? So I'm just sitting there. I'm hungover. I'm like high. I'm just like not really thinking too much about anything. And I will also add some context that we had both been scheduled for what's called after school suspension that day. So on Friday, basically, we would have to stay late with the other kids who were being disciplined for whatever reason and like walk around the campus and pick up trash, right? It's like in school suspension. And just like I had talked about in the previous story where we would smoke weed at school, a lot of kids would also like do that same shit on Friday school and after school suspension. So what I didn't know at the time, but I came to learn very quickly, is, okay, so the principal and the school resource officer come into the assistant principal's office where I'm at, and they're like, so Steven, you gave your friend Ramsey a ride to school today, right? I was like, yeah. And they're like, oh, and your car's parked on campus, right? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, okay, well, we just searched Ramsey and we found like marijuana and paraphernalia on him. And I'm like thinking to myself, like, fuck. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, so we're going to have to search you now. And I was like, all right. So they go through my pockets, have me take my shoes off and stuff. And they didn't have anything on me. So I was like, I'm cool. And they're like, so now we're going to have to go search your car. And I was like, ugh. And they had obviously seen the look on my face. And they're like, well, judging by that look on your face, maybe there's something you want to tell us. I was like, yeah, I got some weed in my car. So they're like, all right, let's go. So we walk out to the parking lot, myself, the student resource officer, and the principal. And I open up my car and I give them the weed. It was like, whatever. It was some good ass weed though. I know that much. Not a huge amount, maybe like 3 grams or something. And we go back to the office. And at this point, I pretty much know I'm fucked. And it's funny, right? The student resource officer, he's like, well, I have to test this for THC now. So I'm going to give it like a field drug test and he's like, so it's like a little tube with some liquid in it. And he breaks off a little piece of bud. And he's like, I'm going to stick this in this liquid. And if it turns purple, then that means it's positive for THC. He's like, is it going to turn purple? I was like, yeah, it is. So he takes the little piece of weed and he puts it in the little vial. And it like instantly turns black, right? And he looks at me, no bullshit. He's like, I'll be honest. He's like, in 14 years of law enforcement, this is probably the most potent marijuana I've ever come across. And I was like, all right, I believe that. And so anyways, they are like, what was really important to them is if I had like where I had purchased the weed from, right? They wanted to make sure I didn't buy it from somebody at the school. So they asked me like, did you buy it from a student here? And I was like, no. And they're like, well, where'd you buy it from? And I just made up some name, right? That was kind of similar to some name, but it was just some bullshit, right? And they're like, okay, well, we just wanted to make sure it wasn't somebody here at school. So because of that reason, for whatever reason, I'm still kind of unsure, they chose to not arrest me for possession, but I was immediately expelled. So they basically are like, all right, you're expelled. So I got in my car and I drove home. And then since they had confiscated my weed, and the person who I got my weed from, actually, he lived like right behind me and he was older than me. So he was out of high school. So I called him up and I was like, yo, I need some weed. It was the mango, guys. Mango in South Florida back in 2008 was the absolute best shit ever, right? And he sold me an eighth. And then me and him went up to the beach, right? So we rolled up to the beach and we're smoking a blunt in the parking lot. This is like 2 hours after I just got expelled. And then my mom calls me and she's like, you better get your ass home. You fucking about all this. So obviously she wasn't happy and I was grounded. So I had to leave the beach and I had to go home. And long story short, I got expelled from high school with half a credit left. And I had to go to a secondary school for that last half a credit. And basically, so instead of graduating from Jensen Beach High School, I graduated from the Martin County School District. And, you know, in hindsight, I know my mom was very disappointed. I'm sure my sister was disappointed. I didn't really care all that much. And here, I'm looking back on it 15 years later. It didn't really have a tremendously negative effect on the outcome of my life. But it just is what it is, guys. And that's something, it just happened, right? It is what it is. And I wanted to share it with you guys. I figured some of you would probably get a kick out of it. So anyways, I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.